So I want to give the floor first, please, to the representative of UNHCR.
And I'd also like to thank you for your detailed description of the situation and the challenges and the needs ahead. And Madam Speaker, let me reiterate our heartfelt thanks to the government of Bangladesh and the people of Bangladesh for what you have done and what you're continuing to do. You really are a beacon in a rather dark chapter right now, and you put on dramatic display what is possible and the challenges that countries face when faced with such a huge influx. I can tell you we will spare no effort to support you and encourage others to do the same. So thank you very much. As mentioned, the arrivals continue, the needs are great, but it's also, I think, worth mentioning, as Mark so well did, that more hands on the ground, more resources enable us to do much more. One of the areas that is very evident is just understanding how many people there are right now in need, and where they are and where they're located. The government quickly initiated a registration exercise, a biometric registrations exercise, and while that is underway, we are also partnering with the government in a rapid family counting system, which is quite a dynamic system, enables us to locate with geographic precision where families are, who they are, their composition, their specific needs. And it's something that we've been able to train several hundred workers already. We're managing to document and register 16,000 families per day. The hope is that we'll have all the refugee population accounted for by next month. And why this is so important is that every family then gets a card, and it enables all of the humanitarian agencies to understand better the family dynamics, the compositions, who is in specific need. We've already identified that 35% of all families have at least one family member that has an identified and specific need, and it will really help us coordinate the provision of assistance to make sure that we're not double counting and to give the government a very good lay of the land. So this is an encouraging sign, even though what we're hearing from these assessments is all often quite as depressing and dire as Mark so eloquently articulated for you all. In parallel, we're also undertaking protection assessments with our partners, where we try to identify with refugees what are their most urgent protection needs. In this regard, we've identified people who have been suffered rape or who are at risk of trafficking or survival sex, but we've also been able to identify some of their real anxieties and fears. Many of them are fearful in the forested areas outside the main distribution sites. That's something we need to keep in mind. Their women and young children have great anxieties near latrines, because not in all sites have we been able to set up separate latrines for women and for men, so that where needs to be done. Many people have a long way to go to the distribution site. And again, Madam Speaker, thank you very much to the Army that's doing everything they can to build the road so that we can access people in need. This is hugely important, not only to ensure that they get the need, but to eliminate the kinds of risks they have from getting to their place to a distribution site. And the other interesting fact that we've come across in our assessments is the need to ensure among the refugee women that the refugee leaders who speak for them are also drawn from women and also youth. So all of this information becomes very important in informing the design of our programs. And when I say our, I really am speaking for the collective, because we all are working jointly to ensure that our programming is very tied up, as my partners, I'm sure, will provide further examples. Another example is a nutrition assessment, which we are, it's a multi-agency emergency nutrition assessment. It'll start the 21st of October. The survey will inform the nutrition response by giving us a sense of the prevalence of malnutrition, morbidity, vaccination coverage, infant children feeding practices, that sort of thing. So with more hands on the ground, with more resources coming in, and thank you very much for those that have given us, including the SURF, the means to get these important assessment tools out there, we are making some headway. There's many challenges ahead. One is in the area of energy. We can't use gas, firewood is scarce, so we have to already start to think about alternative energy supplies. And here I'd also like to underscore something that Mark Lowcock mentioned as well, and also the speaker. We have to think beyond the emergency into the intermediate term and recognize that so many of these hosting areas are ones with grave economic challenges themselves. So the provision of our responses really has to be done in the spirit of the New York Declaration for Refugees and Migrants, insofar as it has to be comprehensive. We have to look at the needs of the hosting communities and design our interventions, be it in health or shelter or education infrastructure, also to be able to meet the needs of those who are the first responders and are most impacted next to the refugees by this massive influx, and that being the Bangladeshi communities. And finally, it is always imperative to mention that the solution very much rests in Myanmar. That was brought home quite clearly by all those who spoke last Friday at the Security Council special session. Many people are somewhat fearful to return today, but we know the conditions that are needed back in Myanmar to enable persons to return. Those conditions were very well set out by the Rakhine Advisory Commission recommendations. They were endorsed by the government. The state councillor indicated again the commitment by the government of Myanmar to implement those recommendations using a whole of society approach. It was welcomed as well by the National Security Advisor on Friday. So as we work with great speed to support the government and people of Bangladesh, it is also critical that we keep our eye on Myanmar and also stand shoulder to shoulder to offer our support to Myanmar to ensure that those recommendations are implemented so that we can see a safe, a voluntary, and dignified return for the refugees as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I give the floor now to the representative of the International Organization of Migration.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And first, let me appreciate the statement you made at the beginning of this session, and to which IOM fully subscribes. And on that note, I would like to make the following points. The first one is to say that the massive arrival of the Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh created one of the worst refugee crises that country has ever seen. The number you gave, over 800,000 people that are there, and all this happened with a speed and scale that is really unprecedented, and creating dire needs for protection and for immediate assistance. My second point is to join you and other colleagues in appreciating the response by the government of Bangladesh, the leadership of the Prime Minister, the support from the local communities, and the assistance by the army. All that together made it possible to alleviate some of the difficulties that were faced by the refugees, and is being supported and complemented by humanitarian agencies on the ground, UN and international NGOs, and many others. And the critical task for now is to scale up the response on the ground in order for life-saving support to be delivered in all sectors of assistance. And towards that goal, it would be important that we receive more funding. So the call for more funding is something we fully subscribe to. There is a need for more implementing partners on the ground, shared capacity, particularly in support of coordination and information management function, efforts to alleviate the overcrowding and stabilize the movement of the people, which seems going in all directions, but also last but not least, the importance of making sure that those who are most vulnerable would not fall out of attention. That said, most of the critical requirements, which are many, but the ones that I would like to bring to your attention is the need for emergency shelter. The reports that we receive from the ground suggest that there are many people who arrived with no shelter and using whatever savings they have, the little money they got, in order to buy plastic sheetings and others. There are others who just joined those who previously arrived, and in one place you could see more than 35 persons living in one shelter. And there are many, many others who are just in the open. To alleviate that situation, IOM delivered a total of 71,000 tarpaulins, 24,000 umbrellas, 36,000 bamboo balls, and 36,000 matting, 18,000 matting sheets, and 36,000 plastic sheeting. In the pipeline, we have a total of 435,000 NFI kits that are being processed, in addition to a total of 140,000 plastic sheeting rolls. Another problem that needs to be addressed is the overcrowding. I mentioned that because of its dire implications for the good surfacing of the population, especially when it comes to water buoyancy, when it comes to sanitation. There are situations where there are more than 100 people just using one latrine, many sites that they do not have any facilities at all. So this is clearly one area that requires urgent attention, and towards that we are working with the Refugee Relief and Rehabilitation Commissioner, IOM, UNHCR, and others in order to develop the site plan for the new Coteau Blanc extension. This is an important expansion that is needed in order to provide more space to improve the quality of the assistance. The Army is providing assistance. There are engineers on the ground. There are site planners who are helping with that. And the government generously allocated a total of 3,000 acres of land for that purpose. So that is something that would require support and needs to be done as early as possible. That said, I would like to join what you said earlier on the need for more. And we have a possibility now that the Bleaching Conference is going to take place on the 23rd of October in Geneva. And this would be an opportunity to get money as much as possible, because any money that arrives now would make a difference. Any money that comes later would make it difficult for us to reach to the vulnerable situations who are becoming, in terms of vulnerabilities, getting worse and worse by the day. Our IOM Director General is already visiting Bangladesh from the 14th to the 18th of this month, and his visit builds on the momentum created by your visit, Mr. Chairman, and also that of the UNICEF principle. And with those words, again, I would like to assure the government of Bangladesh that IOM, together with the UN agencies and other partners, will do whatever is needed to make the situation better for those who are in need. We are taking part actively and positively in the coordination discussions that are taking place, and we would rally fully behind the outcome of those discussions. I thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Next, please, UNICEF.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mark. Of course, we associate ourselves to your statement earlier, but also want to remind everyone that over 300,000 of the newly arrived Rohingya refugees are children, actually. Children who have, we've heard it, fled horrific violence in Myanmar and witnessed or were a victim of violence no child should ever experience. As you said, the Executive Director of UNICEF and myself as well visited Cox's Bazar recently, and we would also like to, of course, commend the Bangladeshi government for opening their borders. recognizing that this huge influx is putting a tremendous strain on the local community. But I must say the spirit of generosity of the Bangladeshi people is an inspiration to us all doing this work. While this is a humanitarian crisis of epic proportions, and UNICEF is working with our partners and the government of Bangladesh to reach children and their families with nutritional supplements, safe water, and vaccination against diseases like cholera, the protection needs are immense. Children who have escaped the brutality in northern Rakhine State are in desperate need of counseling, emotional support, and appropriate health care. They are also the growing threat within the camps that children are facing: trafficking, gender-based violence, and exploitation. Additionally, we are very concerned about the number of children who are unaccompanied. At this stage, as of today, we have identified more than 1,675 such children. UNICEF and partners are working with social workers to help trace their families and provide them with community-based care. We have established over 90 mobile and static child-friendly spaces, and nearly 300 adolescent groups have been created in both camps and host communities. Of course, keeping children safe from harm and providing some semblance of hope is a priority for us. We also call on the government of Bangladesh to maintain a strong leadership role and to continue to keep borders open, allow more humanitarian partners to support the response, and of course extend international protection to refugee children, and guarantee that children born to Rohingya communities residing temporarily in Bangladesh have their birth registered. While it is also paramount to tackle the root causes in the absence of a political situation, humanitarian organizations must have, this has been mentioned several times before, unfettered access to northern Rakhine State. So we can go about our business of saving and protecting Rohingya children who have remained behind. But to do this, we need to address the critical funding gaps. So we appeal to the international community to respond urgently to the Bangladesh Humanitarian Response Plan so we can scale up our response to help both Rohingya children in Rakhine State, refugees in Cox's Bazar, and host communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I want now to call on our co-hosts for the 23 October Pledging Conference. First, the EU Ambassador.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Under Secretary General, Madam Speaker. Thank you for briefing us on the Rohingya refugee crisis. Your account of this dire humanitarian crisis is a strong call for all of us. This meeting follows a very important Security Council area formal meeting that took place in this very same room last Friday, with the presence of Kofi Annan, whose report the European Union commends. Today in Luxembourg, the foreign ministers of all my 28 member states issued a strong and clear statement about this humanitarian crisis. The EU considers, in fact, that the humanitarian situation in Rakhine State is extremely serious. There is an urgent need to de-escalate the situation, re-establish law and order, and ensure the protection of civilians. Access for humanitarian assistance is severely restricted in Rakhine State. Needs can therefore not be fully assessed nor addressed. Hence, it is fundamental for us that the government of Myanmar intensifies efforts to ensure full, safe and unconditional access for humanitarian assistance without delay, including for the UN, the ICRC and international non-governmental organizations, and ensure their safety. We also reiterate our call to establish a credible and practical process to enable the safe, voluntary, dignified and sustainable return of all those who fled their homes to their places of origin, in line with international standards. Humanitarian and development actors need to work together with the government of Myanmar and Bangladesh in this regard, avoiding temporary IDP camps. Madam Speaker, Bangladesh is responding to this crisis with commendable resolve and constructive spirit. We praise the government of Bangladesh for providing land for a new large camp to host refugees, with an estimated capacity for some 400,000 people. All the conditions must be in place to ensure that the location is indeed suitable to host such a large number of people. The orderly process of registration of refugees is paramount. and the UNHCR must be allowed to play its mandated role. The EU stands ready to support the registration process. In this fast-evolving situation, effective coordination is vital, particularly given the limited role that is given to the UNHCR. The European Union supports fully the role of your department, Mr. Under Secretary General, to ensure the coordination of the international humanitarian response for the provision of basic assistance and the prevention of epidemics, but also in terms of advocacy and protection. The European Union, on its part, has responded quickly to the evolving humanitarian crisis. We are currently providing €10 million in emergency humanitarian assistance in Cox's Bazar, of which €3 million committed after the starting of this new crisis. We have reinforced our presence on the ground, and the European Union Commissioner for Humanitarian Assistance, Christos Stylianides, will visit Bangladesh at the end of this month. The European Union was also implementing humanitarian projects in Rakhine for about €8 million, but because of lack of access, with the sole exception of ICRC, all actions have been put on hold after the 25th of August. In this spirit, we consider that the international community should step up its response. And that is why the European Union will co-host the pledging conference in Geneva on Monday, 23rd of October, in order to boost international support. And I would like to thank all those involved, in particular the United Nations and its organizations, and Kuwait. We count on all your participation to express your commitment to addressing this crisis and the human suffering it is inflicting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. I'd like to call now on our other co-host to 23 October, Kuwait, Ambassador.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me first thank you for your briefing and for your update. And I would like also to acknowledge the presence of Dr. Shireen Chowdhury, the Speaker of the Parliament of Bangladesh. The existing Rohingya refugee crisis have accelerated the scale of humanitarian need, and we thank OCHA for the prepared comprehensive humanitarian plan, and we believe there is a need for a comprehensive strategy to tackle the root causes and to find long-term solution for this crisis. The unprecedented, massive, and swift refugee influx across Myanmar-Bangladesh border is a threat to peace and stability in the region. Kuwait emphasizes the need for the peaceful settlement of the fastest-growing refugee crisis in the world through the implementation of Mr. Kofi Annan's recommendation of the final report of the Advisory Commission on Rohingya State. We commend the effort of the government of Bangladesh, and we support the effort of the resident coordinator, Mr. Robert Watkins. We fully recognize the rights of protection of civilians in Myanmar according to the international law and the humanitarian international law, and immediately give the UN fact-finding mission and access to northern Rakhine state. Kuwait believes that the international community, along with the UN agencies, are capable of protected interventions to ensure that protection response and services reach those most in need. Kuwait has a strong commitment to upholding the humanitarian assistance tradition of helping refugee and vulnerable people. As a co-host of the pledging conference for Rohingya refugee crisis in Geneva, we are looking forward to mobilize and increase the needed financial contribution of $434 million to address the urgent humanitarian needs in preventing a protracted crisis and seeking a sustainable solutions accordingly. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very much indeed. I'd like now to give the floor to the Permanent Representative of Turkey. Sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Under-Secretary General, for your extensive briefing on the tragic situation of the Rohingya refugees. We are deeply concerned about the developments in northern Rakhine State. Instances of arson, extortion, harassment, looting continue to be reported. Last week, I read about the story of Rajuma, who described to a New York Times reporter the harrowing chain of events that led to the obliteration of her village and the massacre of her family. Her deeply disturbing account of what happened to her baby, who was thrown into fire, her sisters who were raped and killed, and herself, who was beaten to death and left to die, was perhaps one of the many excruciating memories that will haunt our generation in years to come. Distinguished representatives, problems in Rakhine State may have very serious implications for the regional and even global security. If the international community does not take a firm stand on the matter, the situation bears the risk of being hijacked by radical elements. We think the gravity of the situation in Myanmar necessitates the consideration of the situation as part of the formal agenda of the UN Security Council deliberations. Relocating the matter to unofficial council meetings is not the right approach. Furthermore, we are now faced with a growing humanitarian tragedy. This should be a concern for the whole international community. With this understanding, Turkey has been exerting every effort to alleviate the suffering of innocent people, including Rohingya Muslims who were forced to leave their homes. Soon after the humanitarian crisis unfolded, the First Lady of Turkey, together with our Foreign Minister, visited Cox's Bazar, observed the horrifying situation on the ground, and offered our assistance. More recently, our Deputy Prime Minister also visited the region to discuss how our assistance can be put in place in the most expeditious manner. Meanwhile, we took the initiative to organize a meeting on the sidelines of OIC Science and Technology Summit in Astana in September. We also worked closely with the OIC to organize a high-level OIC Rohingya contact group meeting on the margins of the high-level week of the UN General Assembly on September 19th. The declaration adopted at this meeting, which was opened to wider participation from non-OIC members as well as UN agencies, was a strong manifestation of the mounting concern of the international community. We now observe an overall agreement in the international community on the following 4 points. Military actions against civilians and violence must stop immediately. Unimpeded humanitarian access should be guaranteed. Safe and dignified return of the IDPs and the refugees should be provided. A long-term solution based on the report of the Rakhine Advisory Commission is necessary. As mentioned today by others, humanitarian assistance to both Rakhine State and Bangladesh is very urgent. For Rakhine State, Turkey is working to deliver aid through our development agency, TICA. There is also a developing cooperation between Turkish Red Crescent and Myanmar Red Cross societies. In Bangladesh, we try to assist the humanitarian efforts of the government of Bangladesh. We recognize that responsibility and burden sharing by the international community, especially in line with the spirit of New York Declaration, is very much needed. To this end, Turkish Red Crescent and AFAD have been working in Cox's Bazar. Our aim is to establish shelters for 100,000 refugees as a first step. We also plan to deliver food and tent and dispatch 2 field hospitals. We commend the humanitarian efforts by the UN agencies as well as the IOM and other organizations. However, it is extremely worrying to observe that most humanitarian activities of UN agencies across Rakhine remain either suspended or severely interrupted. We need to work with the government of Myanmar to find a lasting solution to the ongoing crisis. Turkey will continue its endeavors to draw the attention of all parties into the tragedy of Rohingya and deliver life-saving humanitarian assistance to those in need. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ambassador. I give the floor now to the Permanent Representative of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Ambassador.
Thank you, Mr. Undersecretary, Madam Speaker, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Kingdom of Saudi Arabia follows with great concern the continuation of the serious violations and atrocities, the systematic discrimination practices being launched against the Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar. Since 1992, not less than 1 million Muslim Rohingyas have been suffering through government violations and practices of violence, killing, persecution, ethnic cleansing on the part of the army and the security forces of Myanmar. As a result, thousands of victims, including women and children, have perished. The United Nations reports on human rights indicate that more than 500,000 Rohingya Muslims have now fled to Bangladesh since the security forces in Myanmar launched their military operations on the 25th of August. All information indicate that the security forces of Myanmar have
deliberately destroyed Rohingya properties, including homes, fields, and their food supplies. Since the outbreak of this crisis, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has spared no effort to help alleviate the humanitarian tragedy that is being faced by the Muslims of Myanmar. Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was one of the first countries to help their case in international fora and at the Human Rights Council in Geneva. The Kingdom did not only do that, but presented donations to the Rohingya Muslims of $50 million through programs for education and health. Kingdom of Saudi Arabia had hosted since 1948 more than 400,000 Rohingyas who live in the Kingdom and who are provided with all opportunities for decent living and accommodation. Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has also allocated $5 million of the King Salman Relief Fund to help the Rohingya refugees in coordination with the ASEAN Fund and the government of Malaysia. Furthermore, the Saudi Development Fund and the High Commissioner for United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees signed 2 memoranda of understandings through which the Kingdom would provide an additional donation of more than $1 million to help the Rohingyas in Thailand, the refugees from the Rohingyas in Thailand. In addition to that, a sum of $634,000 was donated to establish temporary and permanent housing for Rohingyas in Myanmar. The temporary housing was completed, but the permanent housing has not even started because of the refusal of the government of Myanmar. Kingdom has also provided $50 million to help accommodate Rohingya refugees in Indonesia. And furthermore, in order to reconfirm our approach to our brothers and sisters of the Rohingyas, the Kingdom last September agreed to provide another $15 million, constituting 10% of the humanitarian appeal launched by the United Nations. By the way, none of these donations and contributions are reflected in this sheet for one reason or another. Finally, I call upon the international community and international organizations to take the necessary measures to help resolve this compounding crisis and to help achieve tolerance and peaceful coexistence throughout Myanmar. We must all jointly urge the government of Myanmar to respect its international commitments, to help protect human rights without discrimination based on gender, ethnicity, or religion, and to help implement all the recommendations issued by the Kofi Annan Commission. But first and foremost, they must stop all military operations and allow unfettered access for humanitarian aid and permit the return of refugees in a dignified manner and providing all the Rohingya population full citizenship right. I would also like at the end to express our deep appreciation to the government of Bangladesh for the honorable role they are playing in playing host to the Rohingya refugees and providing shelter and aid to them, even though this constitutes a major burden to Bangladesh. Thank you to our brothers in Bangladesh. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much indeed, Ambassador. I give the floor now to the representative of Sweden.
Thank you, Mr. Lowcock, and also to the Honourable Speaker from the Bangladeshi Parliament, as well as to humanitarian partners for your briefing and also for your efforts to address the humanitarian crisis. And as well as a big thanks to the co-host that will be hosting the conference on Monday. We would also like to thank all the parties that were engaged in Friday's AREA meeting, in which His Excellency Mr. Kofi Annan presented the recommendations of the Advisory Commission on the Rakhine State, We fully support the recommendations, and we are also ready to support the implementation of the same recommendations. We would also like to join others to to show gratitude to the government of Bangladesh for the generous support to those fleeing the violence. As a major donor of core funding to the UN, but also to the SURF, we are pleased to see that the UN system has acted swiftly in scaling up its response to Bangladesh. We were also very happy to hear about the joint trip by UNICEF and OCHA, and also by the UN efforts to really coordinate response, which we believe is extremely important. However, humanitarian needs are overwhelming and acute, both in Bangladesh and Rakhine, as we all know, and we also urge Myanmar to cooperate fully with the UN and humanitarian actors to provide full access without delay. Our deputy minister will participate in the conference on Monday, and we're happy that the EU is one of the co-hosts, that it has taken up this role. We believe that the conference will be critical to scale up the humanitarian support. We have doubled our humanitarian support since 25th of August, both to Bangladesh and Myanmar, and we plan to pledge further financial contributions at the Monday conference. Finally, Mr. Lowcock, it would be interesting now when we're doing the final preparations for the conference, whether you have some final messages for capitals in view of Monday. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, and I'll come back to your last point when I round up. I give the floor now to the representative of the World Health Organization.
Thank you for giving me the floor. As others before me have said, the humanitarian crisis in Bangladesh is of enormous scale and urgency and remains fluid. There are huge risks and needs across all sectors. For the health sector, the main risks, as you already mentioned, are related to outbreaks of infectious diseases, including measles, diarrheal diseases such as cholera and dysentery, and vector-borne diseases. Rapidly scaling up access to essential health services at the community, primary, and secondary levels is also urgent. There is also need for greater attention towards mental health issues and psychosocial support, as well as the need to ensure the availability of healthcare workers. Early prioritization by WHO and the health sector has demonstrated good progress. This includes a mass measles vaccination campaign, mass oral cholera vaccination campaign, establishment of a disease early warning and alert and response system, strengthening of health sector coordination, and ongoing expansion of access to health services. WHO has also provided vital support to the functioning of 20 mobile medical teams to ensure basic health services. Good progress has been made, but the needs and risks remain huge, as WHO is moving into the next phase of a scaled-up effort in line with the revised response plan. This includes strengthening communicable disease prevention, detection, and control, advanced leadership and coordination, and support ongoing access to essential health services. The health sector response is currently at needs is currently at 10.2 million, and we urge our donors to support our work. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I give the floor next to the representative of the United States, Ambassador Curry, please.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for this briefing today. We really appreciate all the work that OCHA and the agencies working with it have undertaken to both identify and meet the overwhelming needs that have occurred as a result of this massive refugee flight into Bangladesh from Burma. This issue remains a priority for the United States. We are deeply concerned about the ongoing crisis on the ground, both inside Burma and in Bangladesh, and we really appreciate you making this a priority by convening this discussion. We add our voices to those who've already commended the government of Bangladesh for its incredible generosity, and we want to encourage the government to continue its work with the UN to coordinate the response to this crisis. We particularly would like to note our request for an increased role in UNHCR as the mandate holder for refugee response and the implementation of a comprehensive refugee response framework, which we believe would be the appropriate way to move forward in meeting the needs here. We also want to again call on Burma's civilian government and military leadership to recognize the scale of this disaster, condemn and stop all the violence in the country immediately, and end and condemn the attacks on humanitarian actors, in particular the United Nations. The criticism and the unfounded allegations against humanitarian actors are exacerbating an already terrible situation, and the Burmese government needs to take responsibility for its own comments in this regard, as well as the way these comments have been picked up in the Burmese media. To that end, we would like the government to urgently work with the international community to solve the problems related to access for both humanitarian agencies as well as the fact-finding mission that the UN Human Rights Council has authorized. We've spoken often about the situation in Burma in the Security Council, in the Human Rights Council, and in the media. But our words cannot be followed by effective action as long as the government does not allow full and unfettered access for international staff. Mark, we'd like to know what more you think we can be doing to help make this happen. We also would like to know what efforts are being undertaken to better coordinate, capture, and integrate refugee information into the common platform that UNHCR described, and how we can better coordinate humanitarian assistance among bilateral and multilateral actors. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ambassador. I give the floor next to the representative of Australia.
Thank you, Under-Secretary General. Like others, Australia is deeply concerned by the violence in Rakhine State and the mass displacement of Rohingya people into Bangladesh. We have called for an end to violence and the protection of civilians in accordance with international humanitarian law. Perpetrators of serious international crimes, including crimes against humanity, must be held to account. Australia recognises the heavy burden that Bangladesh is carrying in generously accepting an unprecedented number of Rohingya arrivals, and we commend Bangladesh for your support. The Australian Government is committed to supporting humanitarian assistance for those who have been affected by violence in Myanmar, including those who have crossed into Bangladesh. To this end, we have committed up to $20 million in assistance to help address the humanitarian needs of people affected by this crisis, taking our total support for Rohingya and affected communities in Myanmar and Bangladesh to over $65 million since 2012. This makes Australia one of the largest donors to this crisis over time. Our support will assist partners to provide basic services to people displaced to Bangladesh with food, nutrition, shelter, trauma counselling, clean water and education, focusing particularly on the needs of women and girls. It also includes support to the Red Cross movement to provide immediate assistance to those affected by the violence in Myanmar, such as food and healthcare. If access improves in Rakhine State, we will assess options for other partners as possible and appropriate. Australia urges all donors and all partners to call for an end to security operations, the protection of civilians, in accordance with international humanitarian law and unfettered humanitarian access to affected areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And I give the floor now to the representative of Korea.
Thank you, Under-Secretary General. The government of Korea is paying particular attention to the ongoing refugee crisis in the region. Our government representative visited the Cox's Bazar region last week, and we were alarmed by the dire situation refugee people are facing, and the challenges due to the lack of resources. Our delegation have witnessed that the people who have flooded into Bangladesh are left in extreme conditions, many of whom are sleeping out open in the in the open on the roads with the limited access to very basic services. Towards the effort to address current crisis, the Korean government has recently decided to provide $1.5 million in humanitarian assistance for Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. In particular, the assistance is expected to help improve the humanitarian assistance faced by the most vulnerable people, including women and children. The devastating situation in the region must be addressed as a collective endeavor of the international community, taking into account the longer-term consequences. We share the concerns that Rohingya refugees in the Cox's Bazar may not be able to return home in the near future, and the international community should enhance its effort to provide a sustainable solution for these people and prevent further deterioration of the situation. In this regard, it is critical to secure predictable funding and address the root causes of the crisis, and we believe that the pledging conference to be held in Geneva on October 23rd will be a crucial opportunity to secure fill in the funding gaps. Concluding my remarks, our delegation wishes to express that we are deeply concerned about the violence in Myanmar and the refugee situation. We hope that there would be no further violence, and we reaffirm our support for the efforts of the international community, including Bangladesh government, and we will continue to engage in the future endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'd like to give the floor next, with thanks to the role your organisations are playing in relieving the suffering we are talking about today, to the representative of the International Federation for the Red Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your briefing. I join others today in thanking the people and the government of Bangladesh for their tireless efforts as well. The AFRC is appealing for 12.7 million Swiss francs to support the Bangladesh Red Crescent Society in responding to the ongoing operation. This appeal may also be further revised as the situation develops. The Red Cross Red Crescent movements, including the IFRC, the ICRC, and 26 different Red Cross and Red Crescent national societies, are all supporting the Bangladesh Red Crescent. The IFRC is scaling up its operational presence, while the Bangladesh Red Crescent Society has also deployed a large number of volunteers and staff to run the operation. Among the most recent developments, we opened today a fully equipped field hospital near Cox's Bazar to provide vital health care to thousands of displaced people. The hospital has surgical capacity and 60 beds. We're preparing to treat people with a whole spectrum of health issues, from injuries sustained on the journey to complicated pregnancies. The hospital will support the work of the Bangladesh Red Crescent, mobile medical teams, and other clinics, which will now be able to refer more complicated cases to the specialized hospital. Our Red Cross Red Crescent teams have also been providing tarpaulins, blankets, ropes, and food to people who have crossed the border in the past few days, and to the tens of thousands of people who have been living in makeshift settlements for weeks. Red Cross volunteers and Red Crescent volunteers are also supporting WFP with food distribution and WHO with oral cholera vaccination campaigns. As for other concerns, we note the potential cyclones in the Bay of Bengal in the coming weeks can potentially worsen the situation and aggravate the current challenges, and sort of reiterate the need for all humanitarian agencies to factor this into our response and preparedness. We continue to appeal for support, and we'll work together in support of the government to provide assistance. The 500,000 people who have fled violence and lost everything deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'd like now to give the floor to the representative of the government of Myanmar. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the floor. OCHA is no stranger for Myanmar in our record of humanitarian cooperation. Mr. Chairman, regarding the humanitarian work and access, there is the government-led mechanism with cooperation of Red Cross movement, and also with AHA, the ASEAN Humanitarian Center, as regional involvement. 2 airplanes with humanitarian relief items for those in need has recently arrived. During the high-level week, during a luncheon hosted by UK in New York, Myanmar and SA initiated to start consultation with Bangladesh in addressing the current problem. Details are being worked out, including inviting the Home Minister of Bangladesh to Myanmar after Myanmar's minister's visit to Dhaka from 1st to 3rd of October 2017. Myanmar takes this issue very seriously and recognizes this problem and resolute to address this. Our leaders, who have been trying so hard to bring the country to its full democratic state through promotion and protection of human rights, it is sad to see such occurrences happening in the northern Rakhine. Very recently, in our statement to the people of Myanmar on 12 October, State Councillor Dawn San Suu Kyi stressed that we will implement the commitments we made till progress and success is achieved. Rather than rebutting criticisms and all allegations with words, we will show the world by our actions and deeds. End of quote. In the Rakhine state, there are so many things to be done. There are three main tasks. First, repatriation of those who have crossed over to Bangladesh and providing humanitarian assistance effectively. Secondly, resettlement and rehabilitation. And third, bringing development to the region and establishing durable peace. The Ministerial-led Implementation Committee has started its work for the expeditious implementation of the recommendations of Dr. Kofi Annan's Advisory Commission, which we consider will provide a viable roadmap to lasting peace in Rakhine State. A mechanism of Union's enterprise for humanitarian assistance, resettlement and development in Rakhine has been launched on 15 October 2017. Individuals, NGOs, CSOs, business leaders, UN agencies, INGOs, and development partners are invited to join our efforts to providing humanitarian needs and building a peaceful and prosperous future for all communities in Rakhine State. This is whole-of-society approach. At the same time, we might also be mindful in choosing the right balanced approach so not to further destabilize the situation on the ground. To regain the trust and confidence of the Rakhine indigenous people in Rakhine also remains an important element. Currently, the Under-Secretary General of Political Department of the United Nations, Mr. Feltman, is in Myanmar at the invitation of the Myanmar government. There's one example to add on to a demonstration of cooperation of the Myanmar government with the United Nations. To conclude, work is underway addressing this issue. It requires both short-term and long-term solutions to solve root causes and also to bring peace and hope. We invite the international community to join in these initiatives to make the situation in the Rakhine State better. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much indeed. I'd like to give the floor now to the representative of Switzerland.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Lowcock, for convening this important briefing, which is very timely before the donor conference in Geneva next week. I would also like to express my government's gratitude to the government and people of Bangladesh for your generosity in receiving such a large influx of refugees. Very briefly, I would like to inform that since the beginning of the current crisis in August, Switzerland has already allocated $4 million to the humanitarian efforts in Bangladesh, which adds to the 4.5 million disbursed in Rakhine State for 2017 only. But given the magnitude of the crisis, we also believe that the response on the ground still needs to be strengthened in order to provide an adequate answer to the needs of the refugees. And in this regard, we welcome again the organization of the pledging conference next week, and we thank the co-organizers of this conference. Finally, as has been said by many other speakers, we also would like to reiterate that humanitarian assistance alone will not resolve this crisis, and that ultimately a lasting political solution needs to be found in Myanmar. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, I've reached the end of the list of those who had indicated to us that they'd like to take the floor. If you would still like to take the floor, could you draw me to your attention in some other way, because we haven't caught you so far. So if you could just signal if there's anybody who would still like to take the floor, please. Okay, I don't see anybody else. I would like to invite the Ambassador, the Permanent Representative of Bangladesh, to take the floor. The Honourable Speaker has had to leave for another important engagement, but Ambassador, please, I'll give you the word.
Thank you, Mr. Lowcock. I thank OCHA for organizing this meeting and for all the member states and various UN agencies for attending this afternoon and also listening to our honorable speaker. I would also like to especially thank the delegation of Kuwait and EU for co-hosting next week pledging conference in Geneva. And I would like to particularly mention the roles of IOM, UNHCR, UNICEF, ICRC and WHO who made statements this afternoon elaborating what emergency responses they have already made and also what the immediate needs are. I'd also like to thank all our development partners for showing keen interest to engage and also to assist us in this humongous task ahead. While we deeply appreciate your kind words for the government and the people of Bangladesh and also your generous financial and technical support, please help us resolve the issue through constructive political engagement at various levels. So that is my appeal to the House here. Thank you very much.
Ambassador, thank you very much indeed. Thank you all for coming. I'd like to make 3 points in rounding up the discussion, primarily to respond to points that you have raised or questions that you've explicitly asked us. Firstly, on the question of coordination on the ground, the thing I would like to pass on to you, having again checked, including over the weekend, with those working on the ground, including my senior staff on the coordination arrangements in Cox's Bazar, is that on the ground up there, the professionals across all of the agencies working in very close support and collaboration with all the institutions of the government of Bangladesh, including the military, who, as some of you have said, are playing an important and valued and constructive role, but including also Bangladesh's own civil society organisations. That coordination day to day on the ground is working, I would say, by the standards of these things, and given the challenge of the speed of the scale-up, is working pretty well. We need to continue to improve it, but we do see continued progress on how things are working on the ground, recognising the scale of the challenge. Equally, as you will all know, the view of the United Nations is that this is a refugee crisis and it should be treated as such by everybody, including by UNHCR, the mandated organisation, being given the normal role, and including in direct response to Ambassador Curry's important question, by putting into play the comprehensive refugee response framework. That is what the UN believes is the appropriate way forward for the response. Secondly, a number of you made points about the position of the government of Myanmar. You've heard from the representative of the government. You also, I think, are very familiar with the view of the UN and the Secretary-General's repeated calls, which I summarised again in my opening statement. And as the representative of Myanmar said, my colleague Jeff Feltman is right now in Myanmar talking about many of the issues that you've raised, including, again, specifically on the question raised by the United States, the question of access, appropriate access for humanitarian organisations across Rakhine, including northern Rakhine. That's an issue that the UN continues to raise with the authorities and on which, as the Secretary-General has repeatedly said, we would like progress to be made. Lastly, I was asked about preparations for the donor conference exactly a week today in Geneva. I was asked to tell you what I would like you to pass on to your capitals in preparation for that conference. And what I'd like to tell you is that funding is a binding constraint right now. There's not enough of anything in support of the government of Bangladesh in dealing with this problem. The crisis has deep roots and deep origins, and it does need, as the ambassador has just said, long-term solutions. But this is also, right now, tonight, this is an intensely human horror story for those affected as we sit in this room in the camps around Cox's Bazar. And one of the ways in which we can all help, and I implore you to pass this message on to the decision makers in your capitals, is by ensuring that there is the most generous possible response at the pledging conference in Geneva a week today. And I thank you for your help in ensuring that that is what we get. Thank you very much indeed. That closes the meeting.